Ganbei,
Ganbei, Alex, how are you?
not bad. It's a fine day here in China, 20 degrees. Very similar to what you're experiencing in Finland, I'm sure.
It's exactly the same. Sun is shining and I'm working in shorts.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good. So today we're talking about business negotiation.
Again, a topic like last time, which is familiar for many from Europe and America, but how does this apply to China and Chinese business culture is very interesting. And for me especially, since I have actually not yet done much business negotiations, I've only sort of bought services, which I think is the easier part of negotiating when the other party is trying to sell to you. But even in that, I've noticed some issues where I wish I knew them prior to starting them. So I think there's lots of topics we can cover in this 50 minutes, which we have allocated to this episode.
Negotiating or conducting negotiations in China, the Chinese especially want to start from a position where they feel that they have some type of relationship with you, that they have some type of understanding of what type of person you are. And therefore, banquets are a big part of that. And that's why, we covered banquets in the last podcast. So you've had your first banquet, you've gotten drunk with the guy thinks that he knows you a little bit. And then after a relationship is formed, that's when the Chinese will start to enter into a negotiation process.
Okay.
One thing about negotiating in China is that the process can be quite long. It also can seem to be quite informal. So the Chinese themselves will often be meeting at tea houses, whereas in the West, people, if they want to have sort of business negotiations, they will have it in a especially among two different companies, they'll have it in a more formal setting, like a meeting room or something like that, an office. But in China, these meetings, especially for very Chinese companies who are not used to dealing with Westerners much, it will very often happen in maybe not a restaurant, but quite often a tea house, and you go there and you sit there and you drink tea for maybe 5 or 6 hours is quite normal, or you go to a hotel lobby and sit there. I always thought that it was because quite a lot of the meetings that I have had have been in hotel lobbies, and I thought it was because I was the foreigner and I didn't have a home here, so I had a hotel and people just came to the hotel to make it convenient for me. But I've seen that even for people who, when both parties are living in the same city, they will still often use a hotel lobby as a neutral place to meet. So that's quite common that people will say, let's meet in the lobby of a certain hotel, and business decisions are made. Then maybe even contracts will be signed. So someone will have a laptop, and they will, at the end of the conversation, they will. For example, you might have been working on a contract during the conversation, and the contract is then taken to the business center, printed out, signed, chopped, and the deal is done. That also happens. But on the whole, from what I found, the negotiations can be quite long and protracted.
But in this hotel lobby or public spaces, isn't there a question of, privacy? How do you discuss business matters in a lobby?
Well, I mean, of course, if normally there's a little bit of space between the people, but excuse me, in general, I haven't found this to be a real issue.
Okay. We held interviews for our employees when we were hiring them. One came to the to the hotel lobby, to the business center, and I felt a little bit weird to have even that there, even though it was quite informal. Just tell about yourself basically with the questions, I think this is quite interesting.
Having an interview in a hotel lobby is extremely normal. And of course, you don't want to be talking too loudly, but even, very delicate conversations such as wage, or if you're negotiating a price, or even if you're having an internal meeting about, cost structure, I think people are not so concerned, as long obviously as you are not so close to other people. But I think that in China, because there are just so many more people in general, that this concept of privacy in the West, where you need to be really the only people in the room, you can still have a private conversation in a busy hotel lobby or a busy hotel restaurant, but obviously you won't be talking too loudly. And also, if the waiter or waitress comes by, people normally will stop talking. And if they bring drinks or something, then once they've gone, the conversation will continue. But that sort of environment, or that sort of location for even a very confidential meeting is quite normal.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So walk me through the whole process of making deals and negotiating. So if I'm trying to sell to a Chinese company, how do I approach it, and how long should I expect the whole process to take? I'm sure it's industry specific a little bit, like you don't buy rocket engines, buy with your credit card online in 5 minutes. But overall, what's the process, and what should I be expecting?
Well, I think in general, a Western company is never going to have the price advantage of a Chinese company. So I think that there's no point to discuss, negotiations where price is going to be the main factor, because in this situation, a Western company will not be competitive. But normally the reason why a Chinese company wants to buy from a foreign company will not be for a price reason. It'll be maybe technology that is not available. Maybe it will be, for example, they have heard the reputation of your product is better. They have seen the results from other people that have used your products or used your technology, and that's why they're talking to you. So the first thing, for example, when I was selling, in the past, I've been selling pig genetics, and a lot of the time that I was spending was cultivating relationships with people. And when you, for example, in China, in a single industry, all the big players are quite well known. If you're in that industry, you know who all the big guys are. And if you're targeting the big guys, then the first thing you need to do is to work out who is the actual decision maker. And this can be quite difficult sometimes. Sometimes it's a situation where you expect, for example, you expect someone in the purchasing department to have the power about which product to buy. But in fact in China, even for very large companies, they can be operated in a very much a family style way. So, for example, we had one very large customer. We would like them to be our customer, and we were negotiating with them, and we were introducing the product, and we had conversations with their technical people, with their production people. We even had a lot of conversations with the vice president. But it turned out that the person who made the actual decision was the wife of the owner. And she had no formal title in the company. And for this information, you could be spending a year, because normally, even if you live in China, you're probably not in the same city as your customer, so going to see the customer takes time. Although in China people are doing a lot of conversations through WeChat and things like that, but when it comes to more serious business negotiations, people will often say to you, like, for example, we could be talking on Skype as we are now, And then when it comes to crucial issues, when are you coming to my city next? Okay, let's discuss that then. So for Chinese, they really prefer to have a face-to-face conversation for the important things. So you could be spending a lot of time visiting this customer, traveling there. In China, traveling is quite difficult. Just to get to their company, you normally you're spending at least one night away from your home. So it takes quite a long time. You get there and you're talking. Maybe you spend 6 months talking with the vice president, talking with the production manager, talking with the purchase manager. And then after 6 months, you realize that the reason why you don't have a deal done already is that it's the wife of the owner who makes the decision. And if you had known that earlier, then of course, she would be the person that you would be calling on. So it's this type of thing that in China is quite difficult. And even I've asked, Chinese themselves, I've asked, Chinese salesmen, how do they find their contacts? And I had one guy gave me an answer that I thought was quite interesting. I said, okay, I was interviewing him for a sales position. And I said, okay, at the moment, if you took this position, how would you find customers? And he said, I have a lot of contacts in the industry. And he had a brother who was very well connected in that industry. And he said, I will use my brother's contacts. I'll use my own contacts. They call them resources to find customers. And then I said, well, what happens if we knew about one very large company that would be a perfect customer for us, but you don't have any contacts there, or your brother doesn't have any contacts there? And then his answer was quite interesting. He said, then I wouldn't approach them. And I said, why wouldn't you approach them? He said, in China, if you go and approach a company on a cold call, if you're not introduced, then the amount of time and money in terms of banquets and spending time with the important people to gain their trust and to get the relationship doesn't make sense. And of course, I don't agree 100% with that thinking, but that is an indication of how a lot of Chinese people think, that if they don't know someone important, a decision maker or a person of importance in a company, or they can't get access through one of their friends, then they won't go and contact that company. And I think in the West, people would be more likely just to cold call into the company and say, hi, I'd like to talk to someone in the technical department about introducing my product. But in China, the success rate of that is very low.
Well, that's very interesting because, well, two things. First of all, I think now all the big companies from the West are already in China. And the next wave is for smaller companies that are more specialized in smaller, but like in a niche markets, maybe the leaders. And now they come into China without having a big name, nor without having contacts. So how would this company would then engage in negotiations and finding leads and clients?
I mean, I think one of the most important things in China is to have good Chinese sales staff. I've always felt that for management position and for people who are in charge of money and who are in charge of the company chop, that you chop your contracts with, that's always best in the hands of the owner or of I should say Western employee in the company. But of course, not all Westerners are honest, just as in not all Chinese are dishonest. But in general, for a sales position, you always need to have a local person. And with sales, if I was starting a new company in China and I was not well known, I would want to have a really good salesman, and I would just cut him loose and say, basically, you shouldn't expect anything to happen in the first 6 months or even 12 months, but this guy will be constantly on the road, visiting people, finding contacts, having dinners, drinking tea. And then after 6 months, you'll start to find that he has found key people in certain target companies that you can start to negotiate with. Okay. So that's I think the key thing. In the past, I think that a lot of foreign companies have approached other foreign companies as their customers, and there are a few reasons for that. One is that your brand, even though if it's not well known in China or not known in China, if you go to another foreign company, they probably have more experience with your brand from their overseas locations. So straight away, okay, we know this brand. The second thing is that if you deal with a Western company, your chances of getting paid are much better, and the business culture is also going to be much closer. If you're a Finnish company and you're dealing with Germans or Americans or even Swedes, then that's much closer, than a Finnish company talking with the Chinese company. So in the past, there was a lot of suppliers who were targeting, going after, other foreign companies in China. But of course, foreign companies are such a small percentage of the overall market that the long run is you need to be able to be competitive on price and able to perform and able to react in the Chinese market and to go for Chinese customers.
Mm. And I think many companies, when entering, for example, China, have heard lots of stories of being cheated and tricked out of money. And I would feel pretty worried if I hired some expensive sales executive or director who would be basically just traveling all over China for 6 months before he can deliver any results. How do I know that he's just not like getting drunk and visiting karaoke bars for his own enjoyment?
Yes, well, the first thing is, as I said before, the chop which is used, to legalize any contract should not be with the salesman. That's the first thing. In China, the control of chops is something that's a little bit quite foreign for foreign companies, because we don't have this culture in the West of needing chops. But in China, if you have a chop, you can do almost anything with the company. You can't sell the company, but if I had the chop and I wanted to defraud you, then it would be very, very easy. So as long as he doesn't have the chop, there's not really much damage that he can do to you. So that's sort of on a risk control. That's one of the first things that you should be doing, is that you have control of the chop, and if he goes out and has a contract, then that negotiation of the contract goes together with you and him. So that's the first thing I would say about a guy that you've just hired. Then the other thing is that you need to have him to report regularly back to you with details about what he's been doing, who he's been seeing. And in my experience, good salesmen in China are very bad at letting you know what they're doing.
I think that's the same for every salesman in all the countries.
Yes, I think so. And part of it is just their nature. They have a go-getter nature. They just want to be running around, talking to people, trying to get deals done. They don't want to spend time at their desk writing reports. The other thing is that in China is that even among colleagues who are also salesmen, or even, your boss, even their bosses, a lot of times salesmen will try and keep all the information to themselves, because they think that if their boss or their colleague knows too much about this deal, then maybe they'll come in and steal the deal from them and take their commission. So this is a problem. Quite often it's a big problem to find out exactly what your salesman is doing. And in the first 6 months and 12 months, if no contracts are coming in and no business is being done, then of course a lot of people will be concerned about the ability of the salesman. On the other hand, sometimes you have salesmen who are just fantastic and they're bringing in deals left, right, and center. And so, of course, as an owner or as a manager, you're very happy that your salesman is bringing in so many projects. But sometimes what happens is the salesmen are so eager to sell the project that they will lie to the customer and promise things that don't happen. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is another thing. Like sometimes for example, you might have a new salesman, and for 6 months he's not doing anything, or you think he's not doing anything, but in fact he's setting up a lot of deals, but they will mature at a later time. But at that time, you think the salesman is not good, but in fact, it's a good salesman. He just needs some time, to get the contracts in. Then sometimes you have a salesman who brings in a lot of contracts, and you're very happy with him. But then you realize that he has promised a lot of things to customers off the paper that you don't know about, and that might cause even more problems, than a guy who's running around drinking himself stupid and not getting anything done for 6 months. So it's sometimes it's very difficult to judge the performance of a salesman because you don't know exactly what they're doing because you're not with them, and also maybe, if I heard that my salesman was drinking tea all day, every day for 6 months, in tea houses, I'd be very upset. But if you found out who he was drinking with, what he was discussing, and then the business started to come in, of course, then you'd be happy. So it's quite difficult to judge a salesman. But from your question, to get a good salesman is the absolutely number one priority once you have your own products ready for the market. So how to find a good salesman? Well, this is another very difficult issue because most of the good salesmen are earning good money because they're making a lot of business, and they don't want to leave because they know that there will always be a little bit of a lag in their new position before they start to get their commissions running again. Yeah. So you often find when you are advertising or looking for a salesman, you often find that the people that you get are not super performers. The super performers basically are tied with a golden chain to their current employer because they know that they put in the time, they know all the people, and they can just keep their commissions rolling in. So it's actually a very difficult thing to find a good salesman. Yeah. But generally, in one particular industry, most people will know each other quite well, and you will hear from other people who is a good salesman. And sometimes what happens is that the salesman will have a falling out with his company for a reason that is beyond his control. And in that case, that is a very good person, to take. Sometimes salesmen are fired because of maybe, like I said before, they lie to the customers about what can be provided, or maybe, they're giving kickbacks to customers. And so these guys, you have to be careful. And that's why it happens more and more in China, but for Chinese companies themselves, it's very rare that you will talk to the previous employer of a person. I think in the West, it is quite normal that for a senior position that the new boss will ask to talk to the previous employer and employer, and then just discuss, what, is the reason why the guy is actually leaving, is it the same as what he told you? Were there some issues there, corruption or stealing or something like that really caused him to leave?
Yeah. Funny story to this is in Russia we had a employee who was fired for poor performance, and then this former employee then applied for a new job and listed his former supervisor as one of the persons to recommend him or as references. And then the new company called him, and this our supervisor actually recommended this. He like gave a positive review of him for this new
Really?
employee. Yeah, that was like also very confusing for me for many other reasons. But yeah, complete like a opposite business culture.
Exactly, it's strange, but as I said before in another podcast, we should really talk about employees and
Yes.
staff, because there's a lot to discuss. But when you talk about negotiation, so you found a good salesman. He's put in a lot of groundwork with the people, and then for larger projects or higher value projects or projects that are not standard, the manager of that salesman should be involved in the sales negotiation. And sometimes the salesman won't like that, because he feels that this is his customer and he doesn't want anyone else involved. But it's quite important, like I said, for the bigger deals and for the custom-made deals, that a more senior manager from the company comes along and knows from the start to the finish everything that was discussed, in a more formal setting. So that's quite important.
So at which point does the Western owner or country manager join the negotiations, and how does not knowing the language play into this?
Okay, so what I would do is I always consider the Western manager as sort of the big gun that you bring in to get the contract signed. So your salesman, he will be, for example, you have a potential customer XYZ and they like your product, and your salesman has been discussing over many cups of tea about how good your product is. Maybe even the customer has gone to visit your factory. Maybe they even see your factory overseas. But it's come to basically the point where the contract, if it's not signed already, then it's already very close to be signed. I should back up there a little bit. When the contract is being written, if it is not your standard contract, and normally the Chinese, just for the need of face, they will always want to make some changes. And you can, in one company that I was working for before, we had the policy of not negotiating the contract at all. This is our standard contract, and we try to make that contract think of all the possible situations that might happen. But unless you were a huge customer, we would not change the standard contract at all. And then for the big customers, we used to have item 11. And our item 11 was an extra item that we could add in if the customer had any special requirements. So if the negotiation is with a fairly small customer, and with a standard contract, then as long as your salesman, you should have a process that, for example, when the salesman is going to sign a contract, that you're in the procedure of getting the contract signed on your side, that the management has a look at the contract, production has a look at the contract, finance has a look at the contract, and when they all agree, they can deliver on time. The payment terms should be standard, but the management, should do a quick due diligence of the company to see if there's any risk. Production should agree that they can deliver the product on time according to the contract. Then, you can just get it. Then the manager can sign it on behalf of your company, and then the salesman can take it to the customer and get it signed off. But where you have situations where they want to have specialized items in the contract, then even if the foreign manager is not at the scene, he should be in telephone contact with the salesman as they negotiate any changes in the contract. For very large contracts, I think the foreign manager needs to go there. But if it's somewhere between a very small customer using a standard contract and a very large customer, so somewhere in the middle, I think being on the phone is enough to make sure that the contract is set in a good way. Then sometimes what happens is almost everything is done, the customer is happy with the everything that has been agreed, but they still won't sign. And in those situations, quite often, if the salesman can bring his big boss, the foreign guy, along to the meeting, then the Chinese side will also feel a bit obligated because you've made this trip out to his office. He'll feel a bit obligated to sign. Of course, if he is unhappy with the contract details, he won't. But if he's basically happy with the contract, but he still has some hesitations, the fact that the owner or the senior manager of the company comes out giving him face, he will sign. And apart from giving him face, he also feels that if he knows the manager, that if he has any problems, with the relationship or with the service or the products that you are providing, then he knows he can go to you to get help. So this is also a good reason for the medium to big size projects that the foreign manager go and go for the signing.
Is there a risk of the country manager being too involved and participating in the process too early?
I think that you need to look at the deal that is being negotiated. If it is a fairly standard deal or a deal that is relatively small by the standards of your company, then the foreign manager shouldn't be too involved, other than in checking the contract before it's signed. Because in China there is so many deals that will be discussed that are never signed, that if you become involved in all of those, you will completely waste your own time. And also, if you are going to see these small customers will also think, oh, why is it funny? This is a very small deal. Why is the boss of the company coming for this very small deal? It's they will also think it's a little bit strange. But I think that the main point being is that there are many opportunities in China, and everybody, including your salesman, they need to focus on the opportunities that are the best for your company and that are with companies that are in your target audience or your target customers. Because otherwise, you'll just be, your salesman's wasting his time. And also, if he asks you to come on cold calls with small companies, it's a complete waste of the foreign manager's time.
Yeah. In the negotiation, what are the kind of telltale signs of the other party not being happy with something, but they don't say it outright, but they kind of indicate it by simply that the process is taking too long, and assuming the situation that this sales representative is reporting well, and you're aware of the situation that's happening with the process. So,
I think if your salesman has a good relationship with the key people and the decision makers, then sometimes what will happen is the decision maker will call your guy after hours and say, listen, like today my big boss was unhappy because of this, and if this issue can be solved, then it can go ahead. So if your salesman has this type of relationship with the customer, then you'll be getting this feedback, but it'll be private. If it is an issue that is the Chinese side sees as being a little bit confidential, for example, it could be that your competitor is going to pay a bribe, a kickback to the owner. Normally not to the owner because it's his own money, but maybe to the purchase person. And that's why the purchase person is reluctant, to negotiate with you. And if you know that, then you go straight to the owner, because an owner, he only wants to make as much money as he can through the company. He doesn't want a kickback, because any money that he makes through the company is his own anyway. So sometimes what happens, and this happens in state-owned companies a lot, that the purchase people will be asking for kickbacks. And I advise not to give a kickback, but at the same time, if you know that your competitors are giving kickbacks, then you have to communicate this in a correct way to a person who is senior enough to do something about it. If you, for example, if you just tell the purchase, you know one purchase guy is on the take, and you talk to his boss, and then his boss will tell you, okay, we're going to deal with it, but actually the purchaser was going to give him some money anyway from that kickback, then of course nothing will happen and you will never get the deal. So that's where also it's quite tricky, and you have to see the relationship of your salesman and your personal relationship with the company, how deeply you have a relationship with them about how much actual correct information you have and how open both sides will be with each other.
How does the age of the other party play into this? If I again compare it to Russia, in Russia has kind of similar, timeline with China, in that it used to be a communist country. Well, technically China still is, but it's very capitalistic in a business sense. And at least in Russia, there is this older generation is basically missing. Basically, anybody who's over 40 live his whole life in the only communist country environment. So even a very young person could have a very influential position in Russia, which would be really weird in Europe and America. How does this, is this in China? If the other party sends you somebody who is 26, is it a sign of disrespect, or can they have a legitimately already a good position in the company?
I think the only way that a 26-year-old would have a strong position in a company is if he is the son or daughter of the owner of the company. Okay. And with the Chinese company, if it is a government owned or partially government owned company or a state owned enterprise, you won't have anyone who is medium to senior medium management who is under 40.
Okay. So they are, they have learned these skills to be in the capitalistic environment at the older age and perform in this new environment.
Yes, but I mean, like China has all, I don't know how, business was done in Russia, but in China, people have been doing business, for a long time. I mean, they opened up, in the late 80s. And so some people have been doing business, selling to foreigners or buying from foreigners, but mainly selling. They've been doing that, for the last 30, 40 years. So you could, in terms of someone who is experienced, dealing with Western business culture, you can have someone, in their 40s or 50s or 60s who is experienced. You could also have someone who is younger that is not so experienced. I think the main thing about age is that if they send someone who is very young, then sometimes what will happen is you'll go into a meeting and you'll have brought the owner or a senior manager from overseas, and you come to a very formal meeting. You've made an appointment, a week or two or a couple of days in ahead, however much time the Chinese can give you to commit to a certain time. You come, and then a very young person comes in the door, and if that happens, you normally feel immediately that you're not being taken seriously or there's a problem. But sometimes what can happen is the young person will come in and say, "I'm very sorry. The chairman has been called away to a very urgent meeting. He has asked that young guy to represent him for this meeting. But you know that meeting is basically a waste of time. But the fact that the chairman is organising someone to take his place is at least one sign of respect. So in that type of situation, you go ahead with the meeting, but you know that that particular meeting is not going to be very, very useful. Then if the chairman then comes back and he says, but he will be joining you for lunch, or he can join you later when his first meeting is over, then you know that there is a hope that the company takes you seriously. But sometimes just to save face, that you ask to meet a very senior person of the company, and they will say, yes, I'll be there at that meeting. So you arrange everything, you turn up, and the guy never shows up. He sends other people, but he never turns up himself. That's normally a very, very bad sign. If he gives you a call and says, look, I'm really sorry, something, and tells you what exactly has happened, why he can't be there, then it's okay. And that also happens in China. One thing, especially with state-owned enterprises, is that they have a lot of meetings from other leaders and other officials, and those officials almost never make appointments other than the day before. So sometimes, for example, you've organised a guy to come out all the way from Finland to the owner of the company, and he's going to meet with a senior official from the state-owned enterprise that you hope to be doing business with. Everything's organised, and then on the morning that you go along, you come along, oh yes, actually that guy can't come now because he's in a meeting. This type of things happen, and especially with the state-owned enterprise, it's quite normal. But if the guy calls and says, I'm coming later, or please, I'll be able to meet you later, if he makes a personal sign that this is a real incident, that something special has happened and that's why he can't come to the planned meeting, it's still okay. But sometimes what happens is that you want to meet a senior person, and just for keeping their face, they don't want to say no. But they will say, oh yes, please, yeah, come along, no problem, everything is organised. And then you come and the senior guy is not available. And if he doesn't make a personal call to you, or pop his head in the door and say, oh, I have the big leader from the district is here, I have to deal with him first. If he doesn't make that type of personal apology, then you know that company is not serious to do business with you.
Mm. Okay.
But you still have to be ready for these unplanned eventualities, and especially talking about this type of visits from officials. The more senior the officials are, the less time that they will give to announce that they're coming to visit. So, for example, in my old company, sometimes we would have, quite often we would have visits from lower level officials, and sometimes they would just call in the morning and say, oh, these guys just turned up, and they want to have a look at the company. Is it okay? If it's okay, it's okay. If it's not okay, it's not okay. But quite often you get a phone call late in the evening after business time, maybe 8 o'clock. You're at home, and the official who is in charge of your area, your district, will call you and say, the agricultural minister of China is visiting our area tomorrow morning, and we have put your name on the list of companies that we want him to visit. And so, of course, for a high level delegation meeting like that, it's very good for your business. Of course, you want them to do it, but it means that you have to be ready to react to a phone call like that, very quickly. Make sure that the company is looking its nicest, that everybody is ready for the visit. So this sort of thing, happens quite a lot. So if you have a meeting to have a serious negotiation with someone, and the guy doesn't turn up because he's had to look after an unexpected leader who's visiting, unplanned, then this is a reason. This is a legitimate reason. But as I said, he will probably call you or pop his head in the door and say, I'll look after you guys once the leader leaves. So you also need to be able to explain this to your senior manager or your boss, because quite often, imagine you come all the way from Finland to visit a customer, and then the guy doesn't even show up. I mean, if you're not used to that type of culture, it would be something that would be very difficult to understand.
Yeah. I think we're about out of time. So to wrap up kind of the key points, which I learned today. So basically, very, very big differences from what I've used to. Business does not happen in business environment. Relationships matter much more than in the West. No cold calling really is a worth investment of time or money. And what else?
I think that to have a good salesman, I think this is a key issue, and it's also a difficult thing to get a good guy. They're also very expensive, and they're normally very difficult to manage. So it's not an easy thing. But one thing maybe I should say, that while cold calling is not so effective, something like going to an exhibition and having a stand, that's something that's really good. Like if you pick the right exhibition, that is directly targeted at your target customers, then that can be a very, very good way to make your initial leads. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I really recommend. The other thing is to make your initial leads is your salesman will know people. Maybe also you'll also know people in the industry. And through those relationships, those people themselves will tell you, I have a friend who's in a similar company in the industry, and he told me that he has a problem, and I think that your product can help. And then he can introduce you. And then once your customer introduces you, then you're in you don't have the contract signed, but it's not a cold call anymore. You have a direct link with the person. So this is the way that new customers are found for fairly custom made products. Mm-hmm. If you have a retail product, then it's basically, as you know yourself, you have this experience. It's basically finding the best way to get it on the supermarket and in the best shelf location, and then depending on your budget, to put money into advertising. But if you have a custom-made solution, then the most important thing is that as many of the big players in your target audience, and that's through you find those people through your salesmen, through your own contacts, and through exhibitions. Okay,
I think there's a lot to cover, and I'm pretty sure we can do a follow-up episode to this to discuss more nuanced tactics and tricks of the trade. Well, I think that's it then for this one. Thanks, Alex, for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur, and have a nice Sunday. I guess you're going to church now.
I'm going to beach. It's warm. It's very warm in Helsinki. Okay. Yesterday was snowing, but now it's really warm.
Yeah. So you can crack the ice on the ocean and go for a swim.
With my head, you're gonna just jump in. All right.
Good job. All right. Cheers. Talk to you later.
Okay. Talk to you.
Bye.